The envelope hit the kitchen counter with a slap that rattled my coffee cup. Red ink, block letters, underlined twice. $210,000. My daughter-in-law Vanessa stood there with her arms crossed and her chin up, the way she always looked when she thought she'd already won. "You've lived under this roof rent-free for 3 years, Walter," she said. "Time to pay your share, or find somewhere else to be old." I looked past her toward my son. Craig was leaning against the refrigerator, staring at his socks like they'd suddenly become the most interesting thing in Ohio. He didn't say a word. He never did anymore. I was 68 years old, a retired steamfitter with 2 knee replacements and a widower's silence I'd carried for 6 years since my Ruthie passed. And I was being told, in my own son's kitchen, that my life savings were the price of a roof over my head. They thought I'd cry. They thought I'd fold. Instead, I did something they never saw coming, and it started that very night, quiet as a held breath. But let's back up, because you deserve to know how a man ends up here. I want to say something to you before I go further. Whoever you are listening to this right now, driving home from a shift, folding laundry, sitting up, because sleep won't come. I've read that people like hearing where you're from, so if you feel like it, drop your city in the comments. I read every single one. It helps me feel less alone telling this. This story includes some details changed and some moments compressed for the sake of telling it clean, but every emotion in it is one I lived through myself, so I hope it lands somewhere true for you too. Now, let me tell you who I was before that morning in the kitchen. My name is Walter Higgs. 41 years I worked pipe fitting for a union local outside Dayton, Ohio. I want you to understand what that means, because people who've never done trade work think it's just turning wrenches. It's not. It's 14-hour days in July, heat with a torch in your hand. It's frostbitten fingers in January crawling through unfinished basements. It's the particular exhaustion that settles so deep in your bones that even after you retire, your body still wakes up at 5:15 out of pure habit, waiting for a shift that isn't coming anymore. I did that work because I had a son to raise and a wife who deserved better than the trailer we started out in. Ruth and I got married when I was 22. She worked the register at a hardware store for 30 years, and between the two of us, dollar by dollar, we built something. Not a fortune, just a life. A 3-bedroom house on Larchmont Avenue, paid off free and clear by the time I was 55. A modest but steady retirement account I never touched, never borrowed against, never once dipped into even when times were tight, because Ruth used to say, "That money isn't for spending, Walter. That money is for never having to be afraid." Craig was our only child. I'm not going to pretend he was a difficult kid, because he wasn't. He was sweet, actually, sensitive, the kind of boy who cried at the end of nature documentaries when the gazelle didn't make it. I used to worry that the world was going to be too hard on a boy that soft-hearted, and it turns out I was worried about the wrong thing entirely. I should have worried about who he'd let close enough to harden him. He met Vanessa at a mutual friend's barbecue when he was 26. She was sharp, I'll give her that. Sharp mind, sharp tongue, sharp eyes, that did this thing where they'd measure a room the second she walked into it. What things cost, who mattered, who didn't. I noticed it the very first time I shook her hand. Ruth noticed it too. She never said a bad word about the girl, not once. But I caught her once in the kitchen after Vanessa left, just shaking her head slowly at nothing in particular. "She's going to run that boy's life like a spreadsheet," Ruth told me. "I just hope there's room on it for kindness." For May. There wasn't, as it turned out. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Ruth got sick in the spring. I turned 62. Ovarian cancer. Stage 3 by the time they caught it. Because my Ruthie was the type of woman who'd rather push through a headache than make a fuss at a doctor's office. 18 months. That's what we got. 18 months of chemo and hospital cafeteria coffee and me sleeping in a vinyl recliner beside her bed more nights than I slept in my own. Craig came around when he could. Vanessa came around twice, both times with a tight smile and a bouquet of grocery store flowers, and both times she checked her watch before she'd even set them down. I'm not telling you this to make you hate her before she's even done anything. I'm telling you because I need you to understand what that house on Larchmont Avenue meant to me after Ruth was gone. It wasn't wood and drywall. It was 40 years of her humming in the kitchen. It was the pencil marks on the doorframe where we measured Craig every birthday. It was the only place on this earth where I still felt like a whole man instead of half of something that used to be a marriage. 3 years after we buried her, my knees finally gave out for good bone on bone, both of them, and the surgeries took me down for months at a stretch. Craig and Vanessa had bought a bigger place by then, out in a development called Ashwood Point, and Craig came to me one evening, sat at my kitchen table where his mother used to make his lunch, and said, "Dad, why don't you sell Larchmont and move in with us? You shouldn't be alone in that house with stairs. We've got the space. It'd be good for all of us." I want to be honest with you, some part of me should have smelled the wind changing right then. But grief makes a man tired in ways that have nothing to do with sleep, and the thought of not being alone anymore, of maybe hearing footsteps in a hallway again, of maybe feeling like part of a family instead of a ghost haunting his own dead wife's kitchen that thought was too sweet to say no to. So I sold the house on Larchmont Avenue, $430,000, and I want you to remember that number, because it matters later. I moved into the guest suite above their garage. I paid for the renovation myself, out of pocket, because Vanessa just mentioned, casually, the way she mentioned everything. Like a knife slipped between the ribs, so gentle you don't feel it till you try to stand up, that the space really wasn't built for a third adult, and it would need some updating if I was going to be comfortable there long term. $41,000. New flooring, a walk-in shower with grab bars for my knees, a little kitchenette so I wouldn't always be underfoot in their kitchen. I gave them the rest too over time, not all at once. That's not how it happened, and I want to be clear about that because I think a lot of us don't realize we're being drained until we're already dry. $6,000 here for the property taxes when Craig said things were tight this quarter. $12,000 for Vanessa's Lexus down payment because family helps family, right, Walter? $9,000 toward a kitchen remodel in the main house that I never once got invited to enjoy, because somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being invited to family dinners downstairs unless there was company to impress, in which case I was wheeled out like a prop, the sweet old dad. Wasn't he lucky his son took him in? 2 years of that. 2 years of small asks that added up to something enormous, until one Tuesday morning I opened my bank statement online, the way I do every first of the month out of habit, and saw a number that made my stomach drop clean through the floor. $11,200. That's what was left of $430,000. I didn't say anything to Craig or Vanessa. I want you to understand why. Because I think this is the part a lot of people misunderstand about men like me. It wasn't cowardice. It was calculation. I'd spent 41 years reading blueprints, reading load-bearing walls, understanding exactly how much weight a structure could take before it failed. And I understood, looking at that number, that I was standing inside a structure that had already failed. I just hadn't heard the crack yet. So I started listening, instead of talking. And 2 weeks later, standing outside on the little balcony of my guest suite at 11 at night because my hip was aching too much to sleep, I heard Vanessa's voice drifting up from the patio below, sharp and clear in the cold October air, talking to her sister on the phone. "He's basically got nothing left now, Deb. Maybe 15 grand, tops. I say, we push him into assisted living before he figures out there's nothing here for him anymore. The state facility on Route 4 takes Medicaid once his assets are low enough. And honestly, once he's out of that suite, we can finally rent it or turn it into Craig's home office. It's been 2 years, Deb. I'm exhausted playing nice." And then, quieter, almost bored. "Craig won't fight me on it. He never fights me on anything. Craig, he never fight me on anything." I stood on that balcony for a long time after she hung up. The cold went all the way through my sweater and I didn't feel it. Not really, because something colder had already settled into my chest. My own son. Standing in doorways, saying nothing, while his wife drained his father's life savings and then measured him for a nursing home bed like it was a countertop upgrade. I want to tell you I went inside and confronted them right then. I didn't. I've never been a man who does his best thinking hot. I went inside. I sat down at the little kitchenette table Ruth never got to see, and I did what I'd done my whole working life. When a job looked impossible, I started making a list. The first thing on that list was a name. Priscilla Okonkwo, an elder law attorney, 2 towns over whose number I'd gotten years earlier from a buddy at the Union Hall, back when another retiree got squeezed by a stepdaughter and needed help. I'd kept the card in my wallet for 4 years without knowing why. Ruth used to tease me about never throwing anything away. Turns out that habit saved my life. The second thing on that list was smaller, and it's the part of this story that still makes me smile a little when I think about it, even now. $11,200 wasn't nothing. It also wasn't the whole truth. See, here's what Vanessa never knew, because it was never any of her business to know. When I sold the house on Larchmont Avenue, I didn't put all $430,000 into one account. Ruth taught me that lesson decades ago. Back when we were young and broke and terrified, never keep all your eggs where one bad afternoon can smash them all. So $110,000 sat quietly in a separate account under my name only. A small trust Ruth and I had set up together back when Craig was still in diapers, meant originally for his college fund, then later just left alone to grow, untouched, unmentioned, because by the time Craig graduated we'd found other ways to pay his tuition, and neither of us had the heart to close an account with her handwriting still on the original paperwork. Vanessa had never once asked about it. Why would she? As far as she knew, Walter Higgs was a simple old pipefitter who'd handed over his whole net worth like a good, obedient father-in-law. She never thought to ask if there was more, because in her mind, old men like me didn't have secrets. We just had savings accounts to be emptied. She was wrong about that. She was wrong about a great many things. The next morning, I called Priscilla Okonkwo. I sat in her office 2 days later with copies of 2 years of bank transfers, texts where Vanessa had asked for money in writing because people like her always think they're too smart to leave a paper trail, and they never are, and I laid it all out on her desk like a blueprint. "Mr. Higgs," she said, after a long silence reading through it. "Has anyone approached you about signing power of attorney documents? Anything about your finances? Your medical decisions?" And there it was. 3 weeks earlier, Vanessa had slid a stack of papers across the kitchen table, with a smile so warm you'd have thought she loved me. "Just some paperwork to make things easier if anything ever happens to you, Walter. In case of an emergency. You know how forgetful you've been getting." I hadn't signed it. I told her I wanted my reading glasses first, then I told her I'd left them at physical therapy, then I told her my hip was bothering me too much to focus, and I kept finding reasons, week after week, because something in my gut told me not to put my name on anything Vanessa handed me with that particular smile. Priscilla went pale reading through the document I'd photographed on my phone before misplacing it back on the counter. It wasn't a simple emergency contact form. It was a durable power of attorney with a healthcare directive attached, broad enough that whoever held it could make financial and medical decisions on my behalf without another signature required, ever again. Buried in paragraph 9, in language dense enough that a man without cataracts and 40 years of contract reading experience might have skimmed right past it, was a clause authorizing placement in a licensed long-term care facility as deemed appropriate by the agent. They weren't asking me to sign away convenience. They were asking me to sign away myself. "Mr. Higgs," Priscilla said, sliding the phone back to me, "I think it's time we talk about protecting what's left, and about your options going forward. Because what you're describing isn't just unkind. In this state, depending on how it plays out, some of it could constitute financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult. That's a felony." I sat with that word for a long moment. Felony. My son's wife. My own boy standing in doorways. "I don't want to destroy my son," I told her, and I meant it. God help me. I meant it more than I've meant almost anything. I buried his mother. I'm not interested in burying what's left of him, too. Priscilla nodded slowly, like she'd heard that exact sentence from exactly that kind of exhausted, heartbroken father more times than either of us wanted to count. "Then let's talk about a plan that protects you without requiring you to destroy anyone. But Walter, I need you to hear this part clearly. Protecting yourself and protecting him are not always the same project. Sometimes you can only really do one." That conversation planted something in me that took root over the following month while I quietly gathered documents, moved what remained of the trust account into something Vanessa couldn't touch or trace, and started looking, very carefully, very privately, at a little cabin listing 40 minutes outside town, on 11 acres backing up to the Mad River. Small place. 2 bedrooms. A wraparound porch. Nothing fancy. But it was mine the second I saw the photos, in a way that guest suite above the garage never once was. I put a deposit down using money Vanessa didn't know existed, and I told absolutely no one. The last piece of the plan was the hardest, because it meant sitting across from my son, alone, without Vanessa in the room, and giving him one honest chance to be the man his mother raised. I asked him to meet me for coffee on a Thursday morning at the diner on 5th Street where we used to go every Saturday when he was a boy, back before Ruth got sick, back before any of this. He looked older than 34, tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "Dad," he said, before I'd even sat down, "whatever this is, I already know it's not going to be good. I heard you and Vanessa on the balcony 3 weeks ago," I told him. No preamble. 41 years of reading blueprints teaches you that the load-bearing truth has to go in first, or the whole conversation collapses around it. I heard about Route 4. I heard about the office space. I know about the power of attorney, Craig. I know what paragraph 9 says. His face went the color of old drywall. He didn't ask what I meant. That told me everything, because a man who's genuinely confused asks questions. A man who's caught just goes quiet the way Craig had been going quiet in doorways for 2 solid years. Dad, I swear I didn't know she was going to. Don't, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, steadier than I felt. Don't you dare tell me you didn't know. You stood in that doorway every single time she asked me for money. You stood in that kitchen the morning she slammed that number down in front of me like I was a bill she was collecting on. You have said nothing to me in 2 years, Craig, except, sorry, in a voice so quiet I don't think you even meant for me to hear it. Sorry isn't a shield, son. It's just noise a man makes so he can keep telling himself he's still a good person while he lets someone else do the damage for him. He was crying by then, quiet and ashamed, the same way he used to cry at the end of those nature documentaries, and for one aching second I saw my sweet, soft-hearted boy again instead of the stranger who'd been standing silent in doorways for 2 years, and it very nearly broke me. Very nearly. I'm not signing that power of attorney, I told him. I'm moving out. I've already found a place, and I need you to hear this clearly, because I'm only going to say it once. I love you. I will always love you. You are the only piece of your mother I have left walking around on this earth, and there is no version of this where I stop loving you. But loving you does not mean I have to let you and your wife finish taking apart everything I spent a lifetime building. I have already forgiven you, Craig, for what's already happened, because carrying that hate would cost me more than it would ever cost you. But forgiveness isn't the same thing as staying in a house where I'm being quietly erased. And starting today, I'm done being erased. He didn't say much after that. What could he say? I paid the check, the way I always had, out of 41 years of habit that I wasn't quite ready to break even then, and I walked out of that diner into a cold, bright October morning and drove straight to a moving company to get a quote. I moved out 3 days later on a Saturday morning while Vanessa was at a spin class and Craig was, conveniently, at work. I didn't need to make a scene. I'd learned that from watching Ruth handle 30 years of difficult customers at that hardware store register. The people who lose are always the ones who feel the need to slam the door on the way out. I left my key on the kitchen counter of that guest suite, next to a single folded piece of paper. On it I'd written the balance of the account they thought was empty. $106,000, after the cabin deposit and moving costs. Just the number, nothing else. I wanted Vanessa to see it and understand, in the silence of her own kitchen, exactly how much she'd underestimated the old man she'd been so eager to ship off to Route 4. I also left a second document with Craig's name on the envelope, not Vanessa's. Inside was a formal letter from Priscilla's office, rescinding any and all authority the unsigned power of attorney might have implied, along with a notarized statement confirming I was of sound mind and financial standing, filed and on record with the county, specifically so that no one could ever again quietly attempt to have Walter Higgs declared incompetent behind his own back. The cabin sits on 11 acres along the Mad River, and I've been here 8 months now. The mornings are quiet in a way that guest suite above the garage never was, even on its stillest nights, because quiet imposed on you by people avoiding your eyes in doorways is a different animal entirely from quiet you've chosen for yourself. I fish most mornings off the little dock I built myself last spring, and I want to tell you, the fish don't much care that I used to be a rich man's father-in-law's punching bag. They just care whether the worm's fresh. Craig calls sometimes. I answer, most times. We're rebuilding something. Slow. The way you'd rebuild a wall after a bad frost heave, checking each course before you set the next one. Because if you rush it, it cracks again in the same place. He left Vanessa 4 months ago. I didn't ask him to. I want to be honest with you about that, because I think it matters. I never once told my son to leave his wife. I told him the truth, and I told him where I stood, and he had to walk the rest of that road on his own 2 feet, in his own time. Apparently, once the money ran dry, and there was no more father-in-law left to squeeze, Vanessa's affection for Ashwood Point and the life it represented ran dry right alongside it. That tells you something about what that marriage was actually built on, though I take no pleasure in saying it. Some of you listening might think I let him off too easy. I've thought about that more nights than I can count, sitting out here on the dock in the dark with the crickets going and Ruth's old flannel jacket wrapped around my shoulders because it still, after 6 years, somehow smells a little like her. Maybe I did go easy on him. Maybe a harder man would have cut him off entirely, made him feel the full weight of what silence costs. But I buried his mother, and I watched him cry at her funeral in a suit that didn't fit him right because he'd lost weight from the grief. And some part of me decided a long time ago that I would rather have a flawed, rebuilding relationship with my son than a righteous, empty house with nobody's number saved in my phone at all. That doesn't mean I handed him a blank check on trust either. The cabin is mine, only mine, deed recorded solely under my name. The trust account is locked down tighter than a submarine hatch, with Priscilla's office reviewing anything that so much as looks at it sideways. I love my son. I no longer confuse loving him with being available to be used by him. I want to ask you something, the same way I've been asked things by people whose stories I've sat with before. What would you have done, sitting in my chair, hearing your own son's wife plotting your disappearance through a closed window on a cold October night? Would you have confronted her right then, hot and loud, the way some part of every one of us wants to? Would you have handed over every last cent just to keep the peace, the way I nearly did for 2 long years? Or would you have done what I did, gone quiet, gone patient, and let the truth take its own sweet time getting where it needed to go? I'll tell you what I've come to believe. Out here on the water most mornings, with nothing but a fishing line and 41 years of calluses for company. Getting older doesn't mean getting smaller. It doesn't mean your voice stops mattering or your money stops being yours, or your judgment expires like milk past its date just because your hands shake a little more than they used to and your knees complain on the stairs. I built things that are still standing all over 3 counties in this state. I built a marriage that lasted 39 years until cancer, not conflict, ended it. I built a son, even if I'm still learning how to finish that particular job. And when 2 people who thought I was too old, too tired, and too soft to notice tried to take the last thing I had left, I built one more thing. I built a door, and on my way out of it, I made very sure it was me who got to decide how it closed. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. It wasn't an easy story to tell, but I think it's an important one, and if any piece of it found its way into your own life, I hope you'll tell me about it in the comments below. Where are you listening from tonight? I read every single one, and I mean that. If this story meant something to you, share it with somebody who might need to hear that it's never too late to close a door on your own terms. And if you'd like to sit with me for another story sometime, stick around, because there are more roads like this one still ahead of us.